The dust motes danced in the beam of light cutting through the broken floorboard. I stared at the gap, my heart pounding against my ribs. Dad had been gone for 6 weeks, and I'd spent every weekend since then clearing out his office, the last physical remnant of Hartley Construction, the family business he'd run into the ground, the business that was supposed to be my inheritance, my future, the business that now existed only as a mountain of debt that had fallen squarely on my shoulders. I'd been moving the heavy oak desk, the last piece of furniture to go, when the floor had groaned, then given way beneath one corner. Now, as I knelt beside the jagged opening, my flashlight beam revealed something impossible, another floor below. "What the hell, Dad?" I whispered, my voice sounding hollow in the empty room. I widened the opening, splintering the aged wood with a crowbar from my truck. The beam revealed a metal ladder bolted to the wall, descending into darkness. Against every horror movie instinct, I lowered myself through the gap. The air below was cool and dry. My flashlight swept across a room roughly the size of the office above. The walls were lined with metal filing cabinets. In the center stood a simple wooden table covered with stacks of folders, architectural drawings, and a dusty laptop. But what made my blood run cold was the wall directly opposite the ladder. It was covered with photographs, hundreds of them, connected by red yarn like something from a detective show. At the center was a faded newspaper clipping with a headline that hit me like a physical blow. Riverview Mall collapse claims 17 lives. The disaster that had destroyed my father's reputation. The disaster he'd always claimed wasn't his fault, even as the lawsuits bankrupted us, even as my mother left, unable to bear the shame and financial ruin. The disaster I'd spent 15 years trying to forget. I stumbled toward the wall, my fingers tracing the yarn connections between photos of structural supports, concrete samples, and people I didn't recognize. Beneath the central article was a handwritten note in my father's distinctive block letters. "Find the truth, Michael. They're still out there." My phone buzzed in my pocket. My sister Kate, probably wondering why I was taking so long at Dad's office. I silenced it without looking. Whatever this room was, a paranoid shrine or something more, I knew in that moment that everything I thought I knew about my father, his failure, and our family's disgrace had just been turned upside down. I'd always idolized my father growing up. James Hartley was a force of nature, 6'3" with hands like baseball mitts and a laugh that seemed to fill every corner of a room. He'd built Hartley Construction from nothing, starting with residential renovations and eventually securing contracts for commercial buildings across 3 states. By the time I was 10, we lived in the big house on Maple Ridge, the one with the circular driveway and the pool my sister Kate and I practically lived in during summers. I remember how he'd come home covered in dust and concrete, but he'd always clean up before dinner. "Respect for the table," he'd say, taking his place at the head, my mother Catherine to his right, always elegant even in casual clothes. Kate and I would compete for his attention, telling stories about school or friends. He'd listen intently, those deep-set eyes focused entirely on whoever was speaking, making them feel like the most important person in the world. "Building isn't just about materials, Mikey," he told me once when I was 12, letting me tag along to a site. "It's about creating something that will outlast you, something people can trust with their lives without even thinking about it." Trust. That word haunts me now. I was 17 when the Riverview Mall collapsed. It had been open just 6 months. Hartley Construction's biggest project to date, Dad's crowning achievement. I was in physics class when the principal came to pull me out. The look on his face told me everything before he said a word. The official investigation cited critical structural failures. The media was less clinical. Negligence. Corner cutting. Manslaughter. Dad maintained his innocence through it all. The trials, the settlements that drained our accounts, the slow, agonizing death of the company he'd built over 30 years. "I checked those supports myself, Michael," he told me the night before I left for college, his voice hoarse, eyes bloodshot. "We were sitting in the kitchen of the rental we'd moved to after selling the house. Something isn't right. Someone tampered with those beams after inspection." I didn't believe him. Nobody did. Not the courts, not the victims' families, not even Mom, who packed her bags 6 months after the collapse and moved to her sister's in Arizona. Only Kate stood by him completely, dropping out of nursing school to help him fight the legal battles. I chose escape. Engineering school in California, as far from the Hartley name as I could get. I changed my major from structural engineering to electrical. I couldn't bear the thought of following in his footsteps anymore. I called on birthdays and Christmas, visited once a year out of obligation. When Kate called to tell me he'd had a heart attack at 63, I felt a complicated grief, sadness tangled with the relief that his suffering was finally over. And now this. A hidden room beneath his rented office space, filled with what looked like 15 years of private investigation. I pulled one of the files from the table. Inside were copies of material testing reports with certain sections highlighted, scrawled in the margins, falsified, compared to original samples. Another folder contained photographs of a concrete support beam with what appeared to be drill marks. My father's handwriting again. Evidence of post-construction tampering. I sank into the chair, a wave of nausea washing over me. Had I spent 15 years resenting a man who was telling the truth all along? The following morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I couldn't face my engineering team at Westlake Power while my mind was churning with what I'd found in Dad's secret room. Instead, I drove to Kate's house, the laptop and several folders from the room stashed in my backpack. Kate opened the door with her 4-year-old daughter Emma balanced on her hip. My niece squealed and reached for me, nearly toppling out of Kate's arms in her excitement. "Uncle Mike, did you bring me anything?" "Emma," Kate scolded, but I was already reaching into my pocket for the small stuffed penguin I'd grabbed at the gas station. Emma clutched it to her chest in delight. "You spoil her," Kate said, but she was smiling. At 35, my sister looked more like our mother than ever, the same heart-shaped face and determined chin, though motherhood and the years caring for Dad had etched fine lines around her eyes. "Can we talk?" I asked, nodding toward her kitchen. "Alone?" 20 minutes later, Emma was contentedly watching cartoons, while Kate and I sat at her kitchen table, the contents of my backpack spread between us. I'd explained about the hidden room, watching her expression shift from confusion to shock to a vindication that made my stomach twist with guilt. "I told you," she whispered, her fingers tracing our father's handwriting on one of the documents. "All these years, I told you he wasn't responsible. Kate, do you know what it was like?" Her voice remained low, but I could hear the years of pent-up anger. "Watching you walk away while he fought to clear his name, while I gave up everything to help him?" "I thought he was in denial," I said, the excuse sounding hollow even to my own ears. "Everyone did." "Not everyone. I believed him." I couldn't meet her eyes. "I know. You were right." She sighed, the anger seeming to drain from her. "It doesn't matter now. He's gone." She tapped the laptop. "Have you turned this on?" "Battery's dead, and I couldn't find a charger that fits. It's an old model." Kate stood up and rummaged through a drawer, eventually producing a tangle of chargers. "This might work. It's from his old camera." Remarkably, it fit. We waited in tense silence as the ancient laptop hummed to life, revealing a password prompt. "Any ideas?" I asked. Kate tried our birthdays, Mom's name, and several other obvious combinations without success. After the 6th failed attempt, she sat back, frustrated. "He never used passwords I couldn't guess." I stared at the screen, thinking. "What about Riverview?" "Too obvious." "The date of the collapse?" She typed it in. Nothing. I closed my eyes, trying to think like my father. What would matter most to him? What would he never forget? "Try 17 lives," I said quietly. Kate's fingers hesitated. Over the keys, then slowly typed. The password field cleared, and the desktop appeared, a simple blue background with a dozen or so folders. "How did you know?" she asked. "Because that's what would haunt him most." I pulled the laptop closer. The people he couldn't save. The folders were meticulously labeled: original plans, material testing, inspection reports, witness statements, Riverview LLC investors, insurance claims, and most ominously, suspects. I clicked on the last one, revealing a list of names, most unfamiliar to me, except for one: Robert Kessler. "Kessler Construction," Kate murmured, "Dad's biggest competitor." And the company that got all the major contracts after Hartley went under, I added, a chill running through me. I opened a document titled Summary of Findings. It was dated just 3 weeks before Dad's death. His final conclusions after 15 years of investigation. I read aloud. Evidence indicates deliberate sabotage of critical support structures post-final inspection. Microfractures in concrete samples consistent with chemical deterioration agent. Security footage from days preceding collapse shows unauthorized maintenance access. 3 individuals identified entering restricted structural areas. J. Weiss, maintenance supervisor, deceased 2019. Unknown male, facial recognition inconclusive. And T. Mercer, former Hartley employee, terminated 2008, subsequently hired by Kessler Construction. I looked up at Kate, whose face had gone pale. Thomas Mercer, she said. Dad fired him for falsifying inspection reports. And Kessler hired him right after. I continued reading. Financial records indicate unusual payments from offshore account to Weiss and Mercer in months before and after collapse. Same account linked to Shell Company, with connections to Kessler Construction leadership. Evidence circumstantial but compelling. Next steps. Confront Mercer with evidence. Contact DA Harrison, reopening investigation. The final line sent ice through my veins. If anything happens to me, Michael knows what to do. I stared at Kate. He never contacted me. He wrote this 3 weeks before his heart attack, and he never said a word. Maybe he was waiting to gather more evidence, Kate suggested, but her voice was uncertain. Or maybe... I couldn't finish the thought. Kate did it for me. Maybe his heart attack wasn't natural. The idea hung between us, too terrible to dismiss, too plausible to ignore. My father, who'd spent 15 years trying to prove his innocence, who had finally gathered enough evidence to potentially clear his name, suddenly dies just before he can go public. We need to find Thomas Mercer, I said. Kate nodded slowly. And we need to be careful. If Dad was right, if someone really did sabotage that mall and let him take the blame, then they've already gotten away with 17 murders, I finished. And they might not hesitate to make it 19. Finding Thomas Mercer proved surprisingly easy. A quick social media search revealed he was still working for Kessler Construction as a site manager. Their company website even listed him as overseeing their current project, a new office complex downtown. What to do with that information was the harder question. Kate wanted to confront him immediately, but I counseled caution. We need more than Dad's notes, I argued as we sat in my car outside Kate's house the next morning. If we go accusing people of murder with nothing but a dead man's investigation, best case scenario, we get laughed off. Worst case, we tip our hand to dangerous people. So what do you suggest? Kate asked, checking her watch. She had to pick Emma up from preschool in an hour. I still have contacts in the construction industry. Let me ask around about Mercer, see what I can find out without raising suspicions. And we should try to locate this DA Harrison that Dad mentioned. District Attorney William Harrison, Kate supplied. He retired a few years ago. I remember because Dad mentioned it, said the new DA was in Kessler's pocket. Can you find him? As Dad's caregiver, you'd have a legitimate reason to contact him. Maybe something about Dad's estate. Kate nodded. I'll try. What about the evidence in Dad's room? Should we move it somewhere safer? I'd been thinking about that all night. Not yet. If someone knows about it and sees us removing things, it might force their hand. For now, I've locked the access point. I'll set up some discreet security. We agreed to meet again in 2 days, and I dropped Kate at her house before heading to my apartment to make some calls. My first was to an old college friend who now worked for the city planning department. Hey, Eric, it's Michael Hartley. Listen, I need a favor. 3 hours and 5 phone calls later, I had a clearer picture of Thomas Mercer. After leaving Hartley Construction, he'd risen quickly through Kessler's ranks, despite a reputation for cutting corners. He'd been investigated twice for code violations, but never charged. Most tellingly, he'd purchased a vacation home in the Bahamas 3 months after the Riverview collapse, a property worth well over his annual salary. I was making notes when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a middle-aged man in a rumpled suit holding up a badge. Michael Hartley? Detective Paul Russo, Metro Police. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your father's office. My pulse quickened. What about it? The building manager reported a break-in. Since you're the one clearing out the space, I thought you might know something about it. I hesitated, then opened the door. There was no break-in. I've been the only one with keys. The detective studied me. Mind if I come in? I stepped aside, mentally cataloging what was visible in my apartment. The laptop was in my bedroom, the files locked in my car. The manager says someone tampered with the floor, Russo continued, remaining standing even after I offered him a seat. Care to explain that? I decided on a partial truth. I discovered some structural damage while moving furniture. The building's pretty old. I was planning to inform the manager. Structural damage that just happens to reveal a hidden room? His eyebrows raised. That's quite a coincidence. My blood went cold. How do you know about that? Building inspector checked it out after the manager's call, found a ladder going down to some kind of, what would you call it, a panic room, a storage space? He paused. Or maybe conspiracy den would be more accurate. I said nothing, my mind racing. If the police were involved, that meant the room was compromised. Any evidence could be disappearing right now. Look, Mr. Hartley, I knew your father. Not well, but I remember the Riverview case. Nasty business. He was innocent, I said automatically. Something flickered in Russo's eyes, surprise or perhaps interest. That's not what the courts decided. New evidence suggests otherwise. The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Russo's posture changed subtly, becoming more alert. New evidence? Care to elaborate? I backpedaled. Just things I've found while clearing his effects. Nothing concrete. But concrete enough for you to make that statement. Russo pulled out a card and placed it on my coffee table. If you have evidence related to the Riverview collapse, that's a matter for official channels. 17 people died, Mr. Hartley. Their families deserve proper justice, not amateur detective work. Is that a threat? I asked. It's advice. He moved toward the door. By the way, the room's been sealed as part of an ongoing investigation. Don't go back there without authorization. After he left, I immediately called Kate, but it went to voicemail. I grabbed my keys and headed for my car, intending to drive to her house, when my phone rang with an unknown number. Hello? Michael Hartley? A male voice, unfamiliar. Who's asking? Someone who knew your father. Someone who knows what you found. A pause. If you want to know the truth about Riverview, come to Westlake Park. The bench by the fountain. 1 hour. Come alone. The line went dead before I could respond. I sat in my car, weighing my options. This could be a trap, but it could also be the break we needed, someone who knew what Dad had discovered. I tried Kate again. Still no answer. I made my decision. I would go to the meeting, but I'd take precautions. I texted Kate my destination and the mysterious caller's message, then drove to Westlake Park, parking where I could observe the meeting spot before approaching. The park was busy with afternoon visitors, families, joggers, office workers on late lunch breaks. The bench by the fountain was occupied by an elderly man feeding pigeons. Nothing seemed out of place, but my nerves were on edge as I approached cautiously. As I neared the bench, the old man looked up. There was something vaguely familiar about him, but I couldn't place it. Michael, he said, his voice matching the one on the phone. You look like your father. Who are you? He scattered the last of his breadcrumbs. William Harrison. I was the DA during the Riverview case. He patted the bench beside him. We have a lot to discuss, and not much time. Former District Attorney William Harrison looked nothing like the commanding figure I remembered from news coverage of the Riverview trials. Age had bent his once straight back, and his hands trembled slightly as he brushed breadcrumbs from his lap. But his eyes were sharp and alert as they studied me. Your father contacted me 3 weeks before he died, Harrison said without preamble. Said he had evidence that would reopen the Riverview case. We were supposed to meet, but... He shrugged. Heart attack, they said. You don't believe it was natural, I stated rather than asked. Harrison glanced around the park before answering. James was in remarkable health for his age. When he called me, he was energetic, focused, then suddenly dead. Convenient timing for certain parties. Kessler Construction, I said. Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. You've been doing your homework. I found my father's hidden room, his notes, his investigation. And now the police know about it too. It wasn't a question. How did you know that? Because I still have friends in the department. Detective Russo reports directly to Captain Lawrence Mills, and Mills plays golf every Sunday with Robert Kessler. Harrison leaned closer. Whatever was in that room is probably being sanitized as we speak. My stomach dropped. I have some of Dad's files, and his laptop. Relief flickered across Harrison's face. Good, that's very good. What have you learned? I summarized what Kate and I had discovered about Thomas Mercer and the evidence of sabotage. Harrison listened intently, occasionally nodding. Your father told me something similar. He believed Kessler orchestrated the sabotage to destroy Hartley Construction. With your father's company out of the way, Kessler secured every major contract in the region for years afterward. But 17 people died, I said, the horror of it still fresh. Surely they didn't mean for that to happen. Harrison's expression hardened. The original plan may have been just to cause structural problems, enough to raise doubts about your father's work, trigger investigations, delay projects. But something went wrong. The damage was more severe than intended, or it affected the wrong support. Either way, once people died, there was no going back. They had to ensure your father took all the blame. And you believe this? You were the DA who prosecuted the case against my father's company. Harrison's eyes clouded with regret. I followed the evidence we had at the time. The inspection, reports, the material testing, all pointed to Hartley Construction. What I didn't know then was that those reports had been tampered with. He sighed heavily. Your father tried to tell me, but without proof, what could I do? By the time he started gathering real evidence, I was being pushed toward retirement. I processed this information, anger building inside me. So what now? If the police are compromised and the evidence is being destroyed, how do we prove any of this? Thomas Mercer is the weak link, Harrison said. Your father believed Mercer was having second thoughts. The deaths weigh on him. He's developed a drinking problem, his marriage failed. He might be persuaded to talk. Persuaded how? If I approach him directly, he'll just alert Kessler. Not if he believes it's in his interest to cooperate. Harrison reached into his jacket and produced a sealed envelope. This contains copies of bank records showing transfers to Mercer's offshore account. Your father obtained them, well, let's say through unofficial channels. Not admissible in court, but enough to scare Mercer. Tell him you have more. Enough to link him directly to the deaths. I took the envelope hesitantly. You're suggesting blackmail. I'm suggesting leverage. Harrison stood, his movements suddenly more fluid, as if our conversation had energized him. Mercer is working at the Kessler site on 10th Street. He usually takes his lunch at the diner across the road. Tomorrow, noon. As Harrison walked away, I called after him. Why are you helping us? Why now, after all these years? He turned, his face solemn. Because I helped convict an innocent man. Because 17 families never got real justice. A pause. And because your father was my friend, even after everything. I owe him this. I watched him disappear among the park visitors, the envelope heavy in my hand. My phone buzzed, a text from Kate. Called Harrison, meeting him tomorrow. Where are you? I quickly replied. Just met him. Call me ASAP. I was walking back to my car when I noticed a black SUV with tinted windows parked nearby. It hadn't been there when I arrived. As I approached my own vehicle, the SUV's engine started. I quickened my pace, a prickle of unease crawling up my spine. By the time I reached my car, the SUV had pulled out, driving slowly past me. Through the driver's window, I caught a glimpse of a face I recognized from my father's files. Robert Kessler himself, staring directly at me as he passed. The message couldn't have been clearer. I was being watched. They knew what I was doing, and they wanted me to know they knew. With shaking hands, I called Kate again. This time she answered. Kate, listen carefully. I think we're in danger. Meet me at that coffee shop we used to go to in college. The one with the back exit, 1 hour. I started my car, checking my mirrors constantly. The black SUV was nowhere in sight, but that didn't mean it was gone. As I pulled into traffic, I made a decision. Tomorrow, I would confront Thomas Mercer. But tonight, I needed to ensure my sister and niece were safe. Because if Robert Kessler was willing to kill 17 strangers to destroy my father, what would he do to my father's children who threatened to expose him? The diner across from the Kessler construction site was exactly the kind of place you'd expect construction workers to frequent. Vinyl booths, laminated menus, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. I sat in a corner booth with a clear view of the door, Harrison's envelope on the table beside me, my hands wrapped around a mug I wasn't drinking from. Kate had wanted to come, but I'd convinced her to stay away. If things went sideways, Emma needed at least one parent to come home. The reminder that her daughter was counting on her had finally persuaded her, though not without extracting my promise to record the conversation with Mercer on my phone. At 12:07, Thomas Mercer walked in. I recognized him immediately from the photos in Dad's files, though the years had not been kind. His once robust frame had softened, and deep lines bracketed his mouth. He nodded to the waitress with the familiarity of a regular and took a seat at the counter. I waited until he'd ordered before approaching, sliding onto the stool beside him. "Thomas Mercer?" I kept my voice low. He glanced at me, annoyed at the interruption. "Do I know you?" "No, but you knew my father, James Hartley." The change in his expression was immediate, shock followed by fear, then a forced neutrality. "Sorry about your loss, but that was a long time ago, and I've got nothing to say about it." He started to stand. I placed Harrison's envelope on the counter. "Sit down, Mr. Mercer, unless you want me to discuss the contents of this envelope where everyone can hear." His eyes darted to the envelope, then around the diner. Reluctantly, he sat back down. "What do you want?" "The truth about Riverview." He gave a humorless laugh. "Truth? The truth is your father cut corners. The mall collapsed. People died. End of story." I opened the envelope and slid one of the bank statements toward him. "Is that why you received $250,000 in an offshore account 3 days after the collapse? Payment for a job well done?" The color drained from Mercer's face. "Where did you get this?" "My father spent 15 years building a case. He had more, much more. Enough to prove that you, under orders from Robert Kessler, sabotaged those support structures." I leaned closer. 17 counts of murder, Mr. Mercer. That's the death penalty in this state." "You're insane," he hissed, but his hands were shaking. "You can't prove anything." "My father could. That's why he died, isn't it? Not a heart attack. Kessler had him killed before he could go public." Something flickered in Mercer's eyes. Not denial, but confirmation. My blood ran cold. It had been a theory, a suspicion. Now I knew. "I had nothing to do with that," Mercer whispered. "I swear to God." "But you knew about it. You knew Kessler had my father killed, and you said nothing." Mercer's shoulders slumped. "What was I supposed to do? By then I was in too deep." He rubbed his face with trembling hands. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. The mall, no one was supposed to get hurt." "What was supposed to happen?" He looked around nervously before continuing. "Kessler just wanted to damage your father's reputation. Create some structural issues that would be discovered during the first year. Cracks, water damage, nothing catastrophic. Enough to trigger lawsuits, insurance investigations. Hartley Construction would lose contracts, face financial penalties. And Kessler would step in to take over the market," I finished. Mercer nodded miserably. "I was just supposed to introduce a chemical compound into specific concrete pillars, something that would accelerate deterioration. Slow, controlled damage." "What went wrong?" "I don't know exactly. I followed instructions, but something about the compound, or the concrete mix, or the load-bearing calculations. The deterioration happened much faster than anyone predicted. By the time anyone realized, it was too late." The waitress arrived with Mercer's food. He waved it away, his appetite clearly gone. "I've lived with this for 15 years, he continued after she left. "Nightmares every night, faces of those people. I've thought about coming forward so many times, but Kessler would have you killed," I said. "Just like my father." Mercer didn't deny it. "What do you want from me?" "Testimony. A sworn statement about what really happened. Help me clear my father's name and bring Kessler to justice." He gave a bitter laugh. "You're asking me to sign my own death warrant." "I'm offering you a chance at redemption." I gathered the papers back into the envelope. "Think about it. I'll be in touch. As I stood to leave, Mercer grabbed my arm. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Kessler has connections everywhere. Police, city hall, judges. Why do you think your father could never get anyone to listen? Times change, people talk, especially when they're facing murder charges themselves. I pulled my arm free. One more thing. The chemical compound you used. Do you still have access to it, or records of what it was? Confusion crossed his face. Why? Because that's the physical evidence we need. Concrete samples that prove deliberate sabotage. There might be documentation in a storage unit, insurance, in case Kessler ever turned on me. His voice dropped to a whisper. I'll think about your offer. No promises. I left him hunched over the counter, a broken man carrying 15 years of guilt. Outside, I took a deep breath of fresh air, feeling simultaneously hopeful and terrified. Mercer had all but confirmed our suspicions, but he'd also confirmed the danger. Kessler was powerful, connected, and had already killed once to protect his secret. I was so absorbed in my thoughts that I almost missed the black SUV parked across the street or the man watching me through a telephoto lens. By the time I registered the danger, the camera had already captured my meeting with Mercer. I hurried to my car, heart pounding. As I pulled away from the curb, my phone rang. Kate. Did you meet him? What happened? He confirmed everything, I said, checking my mirrors for the SUV. Dad was right. Kessler orchestrated the sabotage, and Kate, Dad didn't die of natural causes. Her sharp intake of breath was audible. Oh God. Are you sure? Mercer as good as admitted it. Listen, I think I was followed. I'm not coming directly to your place. I'll call you when I'm sure I'm clear. Michael, be careful. Maybe we should go to the police. And tell them what? That a disgraced contractor's son met with a drunk who made vague allegations? We need more. Mercer mentioned documentation, concrete evidence. If we can get that... A car horn blared as a black SUV cut across 2 lanes of traffic to pull alongside me. The passenger window rolled down, revealing a man in sunglasses pointing something at me. I swerved instinctively, just as my rear window exploded. Michael? What was that? Michael? Kate's voice seemed distant as adrenaline flooded my system. I dropped the phone, gripping the wheel with both hands as I floored the accelerator, weaving through traffic. The SUV stayed with me, closing the distance. Another shot, this one punching through my trunk. They weren't trying to scare me. They were trying to kill me. In desperation, I yanked the wheel hard right, cutting across traffic toward an exit ramp. Horns blared, tires screeched. The SUV tried to follow but was blocked by a delivery truck. I took the exit at dangerous speed, nearly losing control before straightening out on the cross street. For the next 20 minutes, I drove erratically through side streets and residential neighborhoods, constantly checking for pursuers. Finally convinced I'd lost them, I pulled into a shopping mall parking garage, finding a spot between 2 large SUVs where my damaged car wouldn't be immediately visible. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely retrieve my phone from the floorboard. 5 missed calls from Kate. I called her back. I'm okay, I said before she could speak. Someone shot at my car, but I got away. I'm hiding for now. Michael, this is insane. We need to call the police. And tell them what? That someone who might be connected to Robert Kessler tried to kill me? Without evidence, it's my word against his. And according to Harrison, some of the police are in Kessler's pocket. I took a deep breath. We need to get Mercer's evidence. That's our only chance. And how do we do that? If they were willing to shoot at you in broad daylight, they'll go after Mercer too. She was right. Mercer was probably already being questioned about our meeting, or worse. We need help, I admitted. Someone Kessler can't touch. An idea formed in my mind. Kate, remember Dad's friend from the army, Colonel Richards? Marcus Richards? The one who came to Dad's funeral? What about him? He's FBI now, Organized Crime Division. Dad mentioned it years ago. If anyone can help us safely get to Mercer's evidence and protect us in the process, it's him. How do we find him? I don't know yet, but it's our best shot. I checked my watch. I need to ditch this car and find a safe place for the night. Can you look into contacting Richards? I'll try. But Michael, be careful. Please. I will. I'll call you in the morning. I ended the call and sat in silence for a moment. the reality of my situation sinking in. In just 2 days, my life had transformed from mundane to life-threatening. People were trying to kill me over a 15-year-old crime. My father had been murdered for discovering the truth, and now I was hiding in a parking garage with a shot-up car, hunted by the same people. Part of me wanted to run, to drive to the airport, fly somewhere far away, and forget everything I'd learned. But that would mean abandoning Kate. It would mean letting my father's killers walk free. It would mean 17 families never knowing the truth about their loved ones' deaths. I started the car. I needed to find somewhere safe to spend the night. And then I needed to find Marcus Richards. Because the only way out of this now was through it. Through Kessler. Through the truth. Through justice for my father and 17 innocent victims. The game had changed. It was no longer about clearing my father's name. It was about staying alive long enough to expose a murderer. I spent the night in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, paid for in cash under a false name. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by every sound in the hallway or parking lot. By dawn, I was exhausted but alive, which felt like a victory in itself. Kate called as I was washing my face with harsh motel soap. "I found Richards," she said without preamble. Or rather, he found me. "Someone from his office called this morning, said he heard I was looking for him. We're meeting at my house in an hour." Alarm bells rang in my mind. That was fast. Too fast. How did he know you were looking? "I called some of Dad's old army contacts last night. Word must have spread. Or someone is monitoring your calls." The paranoia that had kept me awake all night surged again. "Kate, this could be a trap." "I thought of that. That's why Emma is at my neighbor's, and I've got Dad's old revolver." Her voice softened. "But I don't think it is. The man who called knew things only Richards would know, about Dad, about their service together." I wanted to argue further, but what choice did we have? We needed allies, and Richards was our best hope. "I'll be there in 45 minutes, I said. "Don't let him in until I arrive." I abandoned my shot-up car behind the motel and called a rideshare to take me within a few blocks of Kate's house. I approached cautiously, scanning for black SUVs or suspicious vehicles. The street seemed normal. Kids riding bikes, a woman walking a dog, a mail carrier making his rounds. Kate's house was a modest 2-story in a family neighborhood. As I walked up the driveway, the front door opened before I could knock. Kate pulled me inside and immediately hugged me. "You look terrible," she said, stepping back to examine me. "Rough night." I glanced around. "Richards? Not here yet. Coffee?" We were in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. Kate checked the security camera feed on her phone. "That's him," she confirmed, showing me the image of a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 60s with close-cropped silver hair and the ramrod posture of a career military man. I followed Kate to the door, staying slightly behind her as she opened it. Marcus Richards looked exactly as I remembered from my father's funeral, intimidating even in civilian clothes, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to assess everything in an instant. "Catherine," he said warmly, embracing her before turning to me. "And Michael, you've grown up." His expression sobered. "I understand you've stirred up a hornet's nest." Once inside, Richards declined coffee, but accepted water, sitting at the kitchen table with perfect posture. "Before we begin," he said, "I need to be clear about something. I'm here unofficially. Whatever you tell me is not part of any formal FBI investigation, at least not yet." "Why unofficially?" I asked. "Because official channels require warrants, paperwork, and multiple levels of approval. And because, frankly, allegations against someone as powerful as Robert Kessler need substantial evidence before the Bureau can move." His eyes hardened. "But your father was my friend for 30 years. If someone harmed him, I want to know." Over the next hour, Kate and I explained everything. The hidden room, Dad's investigation, our meeting with Harrison, my confrontation with Mercer, and the subsequent attempt on my life. Richards listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. When we finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Your father contacted me about 8 months ago," he finally said. He was cautious, spoke in generalities, said he was working on something big, something that would clear his name, asked hypothetical questions about evidence admissibility and witness protection. Richards shook his head. I offered to help, but he said he needed more before involving me. Then I heard he'd died. Did you suspect foul play? Kate asked. I had questions. The timing seemed convenient, but without evidence. He shrugged. Now it seems my instincts were correct. So you believe us? I asked. Your father wasn't a man given to conspiracy theories or vendettas. If he spent 15 years building a case, there was something to it. Richards leaned forward. This storage unit Mercer mentioned, that's our priority. If it contains what he claims, it could be enough to launch an official investigation. If Mercer is still alive, I said grimly, that's our first order of business. Richards pulled out his phone. I have resources that can locate him discreetly. While Richards made calls, Kate and I huddled by the kitchen sink. Do you trust him? She whispered. Dad did, I replied. And we're out of options. Richards rejoined us 15 minutes later, his expression grim. Thomas Mercer checked into the emergency room at County General last night. Severe beating, multiple fractures. He's in intensive care, unconscious. My stomach dropped. Kessler's people got to him. Almost certainly. But here's the interesting part. Before he lost consciousness, Mercer gave something to a nurse. A key, with a storage facility name and unit number written on the tag. Asked her to keep it safe. Richards allowed himself a small smile. The nurse happens to be married to a police detective I've worked with. When I called him about Mercer, he mentioned the key. So we know where the storage unit is, Kate said, hope kindling in her voice. We do. The question is, do Kessler's people know as well? Richards stood. We need to move quickly. If there's evidence in that unit, we need to secure it before they do. What's the plan? I asked. You two stay here. I'll retrieve whatever's in the unit. No, I said firmly. I'm coming with you. Richards studied me. It's safer if... My father spent 15 years searching for this evidence. He died for it. I need to see it for myself. After a moment, Richards nodded. Fine, but Catherine stays here. Kate started to protest, but I cut her off. He's right, Kate. Emma needs you, and someone needs to stay safe in case something happens to us. She didn't like it, but she understood. Promise me you'll be careful. We'll be back before dinner, Richards assured her, with the evidence we need to bring Kessler down. As we prepared to leave, Richards pulled me aside. One more thing. I'm armed, but it would be good if you were too. He produced a 9mm handgun from an ankle holster. Know how to use one of these? I thought of the shooting range Dad had taken me to as a teenager, his patient instructions on stance and trigger control. Yes. Good. Hopefully we won't need them. He handed me the gun. But with what happened yesterday, I'm not taking chances. 20 minutes later, we were in Richard's unmarked SUV, heading toward the storage facility on the edge of the industrial district. The gun was a heavy presence against my lower back, a reminder of how dangerous our situation had become. If Kessler's men are watching the facility, what's our plan? I asked. We don't engage, Richards said firmly. We observe, retreat if necessary, and call in official backup. This is about retrieving evidence, not confrontation. The storage facility was a sprawling complex of orange metal buildings with roll-up doors. Richards parked across the street, scanning the area through binoculars. Lot seems clear, no vehicles that shouldn't be there. He lowered the binoculars. Unit 247, Building C, let's go. We approached casually, trying to look like ordinary customers. Richards had the key in his pocket, and I carried an empty duffel bag for whatever we might find. The facility was quiet, with only a few people visible, loading or unloading their units. Building C was toward the back of the complex. As we rounded the corner, Richards suddenly gripped my arm, pulling me back. Black SUV, 3 units down from our target, he whispered. Same model you described from yesterday. My heart raced. How did they find it so quickly? Mercer might have talked before he was hospitalized. Or they have sources in the hospital who heard about the key. Richards peered around the corner again. 2 men, waiting by our unit. Armed, judging by their posture. So what now? We can't just leave the evidence? Richards thought for a moment. We need a diversion. Something to draw them away long enough for one of us to get into the unit. Before I could respond, the facility's fire alarm began blaring. Startled, we both looked around. In the distance, smoke was rising from one of the other buildings. That's not us, Richard said, confusion evident. But it might work to our advantage. We watched as the two men by our unit looked toward the smoke, then at each other. After a brief conversation, one stayed put while the other jogged toward the commotion. One is manageable, Richard said. I'll approach from the front, keep him occupied. You circle around through the next row and approach from behind. When I give the signal, move in quickly. What's the signal? You'll know it. With that, Richards walked casually toward the remaining guard, pulling out his phone as if checking directions. I hurried through an access path between buildings, emerging in the row behind our target unit. From my position, I could see the back of the guard as he faced Richards, who was now asking him something, gesturing with his phone. Suddenly, Richards stumbled, dropping his phone at the guard's feet. As the guard instinctively looked down, Richards moved with surprising speed for his age, driving his knee into the man's stomach and following with an elbow to the back of his neck as he doubled over. The guard crumpled to the ground. That was my cue. I sprinted to Unit 247, where Richards was already trying the key in the padlock. It turned smoothly, and the lock fell open. "Quick," he said, lifting the roll-up door just enough for us to duck under, before his friend returns. Inside, the unit was smaller than I expected, about the size of a walk-in closet. A metal shelving unit held several banker's boxes, labeled by date. In the corner stood a small fireproof safe. "Check the boxes," Richards ordered, kneeling before the safe. "I'll see if I can get this open." I pulled down the first box, dated shortly after the Riverview collapse. Inside were folders of newspaper clippings, court transcripts, and what looked like surveillance photos of Robert Kessler meeting with various officials. The second box contained building materials, chunks of concrete, rebar samples, vials of powder labeled with chemical formulas I didn't recognize. Each item was meticulously tagged and documented. "This is it," I breathed. "Physical evidence of the sabotage." Richards had the safe open now, revealing stacks of documents and several USB drives. "Financial records," he said, flipping through them. "Offshore accounts, shell companies. A complete paper trail linking Kessler to the payments Mercer received." A noise outside froze us both. Voices, approaching rapidly. "Time's up," Richard said, shoving the documents into my duffel bag. "Grab that box of samples and let's go." I did as instructed, but as we prepared to leave, something caught my eye. A manila envelope with my name written on it in my father's handwriting. I snatched it and added it to the bag. Richards eased the door up slightly, peering out. "Clear for now, but not for long. We need to move." We slipped out, closing the door behind us, but leaving the padlock hanging open. As we hurried away, I heard shouts from the direction we'd come. The second guard had returned and found his companion. "This way," Richards directed, leading me through a maze of buildings toward a different exit than where we'd entered. "My car's too far. We'll have to find another way out." The fire alarm was still blaring, and now emergency vehicles were arriving, adding to the chaos. We used the confusion to make our way to the perimeter fence, where Richards produced wire cutters from his jacket. "Always come prepared," he said with grim humor as he cut an opening just large enough for us to squeeze through. Once outside the facility, we jogged several blocks before Richards flagged down a taxi. Only when we were safely moving through traffic did I allow myself to breathe normally. "That fire," I said. "Convenient timing." Richards nodded. "Too convenient. Someone else is involved. Someone who knew we'd be there." "Harrison?" "Possibly. Or someone else entirely." Richards checked his watch. "We need a secure location to examine what we've found. Not your sister's house. That's the first place they'll look for us." "I know a place," I said, thinking of my father's oldest friend, a retired architect who lived in a gated community in the suburbs. "Someone we can trust." As the taxi carried us away from the storage facility, I clutched the duffel bag containing 15 years of my father's work, the truth he'd died to uncover. In that moment, I felt closer to him than I had in years, carrying forward the mission he couldn't complete. What I didn't know then was that the most shocking revelation was still to come, hidden in the envelope with my name on it, waiting to completely upend everything I thought I knew about my father, the Riverview collapse, and my own role in the tragedy that had defined our family. George Whitman's house was exactly as I remembered it from childhood visits. a modernist structure of glass and cedar on a wooded lot designed by the man himself in his prime. Now in his 80s, George welcomed us with the alertness of a much younger man, his eyes widening at our disheveled appearance. "Michael Hartley," he said, ushering us inside. "Your father would visit out of the blue too, usually with less drama though." His gaze shifted to Richard's. "Colonel?" "You remember me," Richard said, surprised. "I remember everyone who was important to James." George led us to his study, a wood-paneled room lined with architectural books and models. "Now why don't you tell me why you look like you've been running from something?" We explained the situation as concisely as possible. George listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grave. "I always told James that Kessler was behind it," he said when we finished. "The collapse never made sense, not with how meticulous your father was about structural integrity." He gestured to the duffel bag. "So that contains the proof?" "We hope so," I said, unzipping the bag on his desk. "We haven't had a chance to examine everything thoroughly." For the next 2 hours, we spread the contents across George's desk and floor, organizing documents, examining samples, and reviewing the financial records. The evidence was damning. Laboratory analyses showing chemical deterioration of concrete consistent with deliberate sabotage, financial transactions linking Kessler to offshore accounts that had paid Mercer and others, surveillance photos documenting meetings between key players. "This is more than enough for a federal investigation," Richard said, photographing key documents with his phone. "Conspiracy, fraud, manslaughter at minimum. If we can prove Kessler knew the sabotage could cause fatalities, it might even support murder charges." "And my father's death?" I asked. Richards held up a medical file. "Mercer kept a copy of your father's autopsy. There are inconsistencies. Trace amounts of a compound that could have induced cardiac symptoms, overlooked or deliberately ignored by the medical examiner." "Who was the examiner?" George asked. Richards checked the report. "Dr. Raymond Foster." George and I exchanged glances. "Foster was indicted last year for falsifying reports in exchange for bribes," I said. "It was all over the news." "Another piece of the puzzle," Richards nodded. "With Foster's credibility already destroyed, we could petition for a new examination of your father's remains." The thought made my stomach turn, but I nodded. "If that's what it takes." Throughout our examination, I'd been aware of the manila envelope with my name on it, setting it aside for private review. Now, with the main evidence cataloged, I finally picked it up. "I'm going to look at this," I said, standing. "It's personal." George directed me to a small sunroom off the main living area. "Take all the time you need." Alone in the peaceful space, surrounded by plants and afternoon sunlight, I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and a smaller envelope. I unfolded the letter, my father's familiar block handwriting filling the page. "Michael, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've found what I've been working on all these years. I always hoped to tell you in person, to see understanding and forgiveness in your eyes, but perhaps this is better. Some truths are easier to accept when the messenger can't see your reaction. First, know that I was innocent of the negligence that caused Riverview to collapse. The evidence you've found proves that. Robert Kessler orchestrated the sabotage to destroy me and take control of the market. What you don't know, what I've never told anyone, is why he targeted me specifically, beyond business competition. The truth is, Robert Kessler and I have a history that predates our construction companies. In 1985, we were both young contractors working on the Westlake Development Project. During construction, I discovered that Kessler had substituted substandard materials in the foundation work, a decision that could have led to catastrophic failure years later. I reported him to the project manager. He was fired and blacklisted from major projects for years. He built his company from nothing after that, nursing his resentment toward me the entire time. When he finally achieved success, he didn't just want to outcompete me, he wanted to destroy me completely. The Riverview sabotage was his revenge, decades in the making. But there's something else you need to know, something I've never had the courage to tell you, something I'm deeply ashamed of. The night before the Riverview collapse, I received an anonymous call warning me that something was wrong with the support structures. The caller didn't identify himself, but I now believe it was Thomas Mercer, having second thoughts about what he'd done. I dismissed it as a prank or competitor trying to cause trouble. I didn't investigate. I didn't order an emergency inspection. 17 people died because I ignored that warning. While I didn't cause the collapse, my inaction when I had a chance to prevent it haunts me every day. This is the real reason I've spent 15 years searching for the truth. Not just to clear my name, but to atone for my failure to act when it mattered most. In the smaller envelope, you'll find something I've kept since the day you were born. It belongs to you now, along with the truth, however painful. I know I wasn't the father you deserved in recent years. My obsession with vindicating myself cost me your respect and our relationship. For that, I'm deeply sorry. I hope that understanding why I couldn't let this go might help you forgive me someday. I love you, son. I always have, even when I couldn't show it properly. Dad. Tears blurred my vision as I set down the letter. With trembling hands, I opened the smaller envelope. Inside was a simple silver pocket watch. I recognized it immediately. My grandfather's watch, passed down to my father when he turned 18. I'd always assumed it had been sold during our financial troubles after Riverview. Opening the watch, I found an inscription I'd never seen before. To Michael, may you always have time for what truly matters. Love, Dad. He must have had it engraved years ago, perhaps intending to give it to me when I turned 18, before everything fell apart. I sat holding the watch, my father's last words echoing in my mind. The revelation that he'd received a warning before the collapse changed everything. Not the facts of Kessler's guilt, but my understanding of my father's obsessive quest for the truth. It hadn't been just about clearing his name. It had been about atonement. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Richard stood in the doorway. Michael, we need to move. I've just received word that Kessler's men are searching for us. They've already been to your sister's house. Ice shot through my veins. Kate? Emma? They're safe. Catherine called George's landline while you were in here. She took Emma and went to a hotel as a precaution. Relief washed over me, followed quickly by renewed determination. I tucked the watch into my pocket and the letter back into its envelope. I'm ready, I said, standing. What's our next step? I've contacted my superiors at the FBI with what we've found. They're preparing warrants for Kessler and his associates, but until those come through, we need to stay ahead of Kessler's people. How long will the warrants take? Hours, maybe a day. The evidence is compelling, but the process takes time, especially with someone as connected as Kessler. A day. 24 hours during which Kessler would be doing everything in his power to find us and eliminate the evidence we'd gathered. We need a safe house, Richards continued, somewhere they wouldn't think to look. An idea formed in my mind. I know just the place. The Riverview Mall site had remained undeveloped since the collapse. After the debris was cleared and the investigations concluded, the land became entangled in litigation between insurance companies, the city, and various stakeholders. 15 years later, it was still an empty lot, surrounded by a chain-link fence, a monument to tragedy that developers avoided out of superstition or respect. It was the last place anyone would look for us, and the perfect symbolic location for what we hoped would be the final chapter of this story. Richards had been skeptical, but eventually agreed to my plan. We approached the site after dark, using bolt cutters to create an opening in the fence far from the main entrance. The lot was overgrown with weeds, with only the concrete foundation slab remaining as evidence that a structure had once stood there. The security booth, I said, pointing to a small structure near what had been the main entrance. It had somehow survived both the collapse and subsequent demolition, an eerie sentinel watching over the empty lot. The booth was dusty but intact, with a desk, chair, and even functioning electricity when Richards found the breaker panel and flipped the switch. We set up our makeshift command center, spreading the key evidence on the desk and using Richards' laptop to organize our case. Poetic justice, Richards commented, glancing around, bringing down Kessler from the very site of his crime. I nodded, my hand unconsciously touching the pocket watch through my shirt. Dad would appreciate the symmetry. We worked through the night, cataloging evidence, preparing statements, and coordinating with Richards' FBI contacts. By dawn, warrants were being prepared for Kessler, Mercer, who was still hospitalized under guard, and several others implicated by the documents. They'll move on Kessler around noon, Richard said, checking his phone. We just need to stay hidden until then. I stepped outside the booth to stretch my legs, watching the sunrise over the empty lot. 15 years ago, this had been the site of my family's destruction. Now, it might become the place where justice finally prevailed. My phone vibrated, a text from Kate. All good at hotel? Any news? I was about to reply when movement at the far end of the lot caught my eye. A black SUV had pulled up outside the fence, and several men were getting out. Richards, I called urgently, backing toward the booth. We've got company. He joined me at the door, assessing the situation quickly. 4 men, armed. They must have tracked us somehow. He pulled his gun. Get inside. Secure the evidence. I'll hold them off until backup arrives. How long for backup? I've already sent the alert. 20 minutes, maybe less. 20 minutes against 4 armed men. The odds weren't good. I'm not hiding while you face them alone, I said, drawing my own weapon. Richards looked like he wanted to argue but nodded instead. Stay low. Use cover. These aren't amateurs. We positioned ourselves on either side of the booth, using concrete debris as cover. The men were spreading out, moving methodically through the lot, checking behind every pile of rubble. FBI! Richards called out. Drop your weapons! Federal agents are en route! The only response was a burst of gunfire that shattered the booth's windows. We ducked as glass rained down around us. So much for the diplomatic approach, Richards muttered. For several minutes, we exchanged sporadic fire with Kessler's men, neither side gaining an advantage. I managed to hit one of them in the leg, reducing their effective force, but they were still advancing steadily toward our position. We need to move, Richards said. They'll flank us soon. Just as we prepared to relocate, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the morning air. The men hesitated, looking toward the entrance. Backup's here, Richards said with relief. Hold position. But instead of retreating, the men seemed to become more desperate. 2 of them charged our position, firing rapidly to provide cover for their advance. Richards rose to meet the threat, firing with precision. 1 man went down, but the other kept coming. I aimed at the advancing figure, my hand steady despite the fear coursing through me. Before I could pull the trigger, a shot rang out from behind us. Richards jerked backward, a red stain blossoming on his shoulder. I turned to see a 5th man, one we hadn't accounted for, approaching from the rear of the booth. Drop it, Hartley, the man said calmly. As he came closer, I recognized him from the photos in my father's files, Robert Kessler himself. It's over, Kessler, I said, keeping my gun trained on him, even as I heard the other men approaching from behind. The FBI has everything. Killing us won't change that. Perhaps not, Kessler admitted, but it will be satisfying, especially killing James Hartley's son on this spot. His cold eyes studied me. You look like him, you know. He had that same self-righteous expression when he ruined my career all those years ago. You killed 17 people to get revenge for being fired? I asked, disgust overriding my fear. I killed no one, Kessler said sharply. That was never the plan. The supports were supposed to show stress gradually, cause expensive repairs and lawsuits. What happened was, he shrugged, an unfortunate escalation. And my father? Was his heart attack an unfortunate escalation too? A thin smile crossed Kessler's face. Your father was getting too close. He'd contacted the FBI. Certain measures became necessary. The sirens were very close now. Kessler glanced toward the sound, then back at me. Time to finish this, he said, raising his gun. Several things happened at once. Richards, despite his wound, lunged at one of the men behind me. I dove sideways as Kessler fired, the bullet grazing my arm instead of finding my heart. And from the entrance to the lot, multiple voices shouted, FBI! Drop your weapons! Chaos erupted. Kessler's men scattered, some firing at the approaching agents, others trying to flee. Kessler himself turned to run, but I tackled him from behind, driving him to the ground. The gun flew from his hand as we struggled. You're just like your father, he spat as I pinned him down. Too stubborn to know when you're beaten. My father was never beaten, I said, as FBI agents surrounded us with weapons drawn. And neither was the truth. As the agent secured Kessler, I hurried to Richards, who was being tended to by a medic. His wound was serious but not life-threatening. Did we get him? He asked through gritted teeth. We got him, I confirmed. It's over. Richards managed a pained smile. Your father would be proud. Looking around at the scene, FBI agents leading away Kessler and his men, the evidence safe, the truth finally emerging after 15 years, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. Not just the immediate danger, but the burden of resentment and misunderstanding I'd carried about my father for so long. I know, I said, the pocket watch a reassuring weight against my chest. I think he would be. 6 months later, I stood with Kate and Emma in the courthouse corridor, waiting for the verdict in Robert Kessler's trial. The past months had been a whirlwind of depositions, evidence reviews, and media attention as the full story of the Riverview collapse and its aftermath came to light. Thomas Mercer had recovered from his injuries and turned state's evidence, providing detailed testimony about the sabotage and Kessler's involvement. The medical examiner had confirmed that our father's death showed signs of poisoning consistent with induced heart failure. Additional conspirators had been identified and charged, including 2 former city officials who had helped cover up evidence. Most importantly, my father's name had been officially cleared. The court had issued a formal statement acknowledging that James Hartley was not responsible for the structural failures that caused the collapse. The families of the victims had been notified of the new findings, and many had reached out to Kate and me with messages of support. Do you think they'll convict him? Kate asked, adjusting Emma's hair ribbon. The evidence is overwhelming, I said. Richards says it's one of the strongest cases he's ever seen. My relationship with Marcus Richards had evolved from reluctant alliance to genuine friendship during the investigation. His shoulder had healed well, and he'd been instrumental in navigating the complex legal proceedings. The courtroom doors opened, and Richards emerged, his expression telling us everything we needed to know before he spoke. Guilty on all counts, he said. Conspiracy, fraud, 17 counts of manslaughter, and first-degree murder for your father's death. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison. Kate burst into tears, hugging Emma tightly. I felt my own eyes growing moist as relief washed over me. It's really over, I said. Richards nodded. Justice delayed, but not denied. Later that evening, we gathered at the cemetery where our father was buried. The simple headstone had recently been replaced with a new one that read, James Hartley, 1957 to 2020, beloved father, builder, seeker of truth. Vindicated at last. We placed flowers on the grave. Kate, Emma, Richards, George Whitman, and several others who had stood by our father or helped uncover the truth. As the others gradually moved away to give us a private moment, I knelt beside the headstone, pulling the pocket watch from my pocket. We did it, Dad, I said softly. We found the truth. Your name is cleared. I opened the watch, reading the inscription again. May you always have time for what truly matters. In the months since discovering his hidden room, I'd made significant changes in my life. I'd taken a leave of absence from my job to focus on establishing a foundation in my father's name, one dedicated to construction safety and oversight. Kate had joined me in the venture, bringing her organizational skills and passionate advocacy. More personally, I'd reconnected with old friends and family members I'd distanced myself from during the years of shame and resentment. I'd even started dating again, something I'd put on hold while consumed with clearing my father's name. I had time now, time for what truly mattered. As the setting sun cast long shadows across the cemetery, Kate joined me by the grave, Emma's small hand in hers. I think he knows, she said, looking at the headstone. Wherever he is, I think he knows what we did. I hope so. I stood, tucking the watch back into my pocket. Ready to go home? Kate nodded, and we walked together toward the cemetery gates, where Richards waited to drive us back to Kate's house for dinner. Uncle Mike, Emma said as we walked. Mommy says Grandpa was a hero. Is that true? I thought about my father, his flaws and strengths, his mistakes, and his 15-year quest for truth, his failure to act on the warning, and his refusal to give up afterward. Yes, Emma, I said, squeezing her small hand. Not the kind in stories who never makes mistakes, the real kind, who makes them but spends the rest of his life trying to make things right. As we reached the car, I glanced back at the cemetery one last time. In the golden light of sunset, I could almost see my father standing by his grave, tall and strong as I remembered him from childhood, finally at peace. The Riverview collapse had defined our family for 15 years, first through disgrace and separation, now through vindication and reunion. The truth had cost my father his life, but in uncovering it, he had given me back mine. I felt the weight of the pocket watch in my pocket, a tangible reminder of his final message. Time is precious. Use it for what matters. And as I joined my family in the car, heading toward a future no longer shadowed by the past, I silently promised my father that I would do exactly that.